She was meant to carry it, the quiet rituals, the invisible laws. Instead, she resisted, smiled too sharply, sat too straight. So I did what every woman before me had done. I watched, I waited, and I wove the net tighter. In this house, tradition isn't taught. It's absorbed, or it breaks you first. And I don't let anything break without making sure it remembers who it dared to defy. You know what's funny? You survive one tyrant of a mother-in-law just to become one yourself, and the worst part is, you don't even realize it until the hate in your daughter-in-law's eyes starts to feel familiar. They call me Jessica. I'm 66, retired, and I have the kind of face that makes sales clerks ask if I'm looking for something for my granddaughter. I'm not. I don't even like kids that much, except for one, my son Victor. He was the only thing that made all the humiliations worth it. The nights I scrubbed floors while my mother-in-law threw plates near my feet because the rice was soulless. The time she locked the fridge and left a sticky note, "Earn your place." I used to tell myself I was building character, but in truth, I was just surviving with grace so I wouldn't kill her. And when she died, I promised myself, I'll never become that woman. And yet here I am, setting the table for Christmas dinner, measuring pepper by the microgram because I know Lucci's allergic. Not deathly, let's not be dramatic, but enough to make her throat itch and her face flush just slightly. Enough to ruin a meal without anyone calling an ambulance. The roast, the potatoes, even the damn cranberry sauce, they all carry that silent warning. It's not poison, it's history. Passed from mother-in-law to mother-in-law like a cursed heirloom. I tell myself I'm not being cruel. I'm teaching. It's not revenge. It's tradition. The thing about Lucci is, she's not dumb. She's sharp. The type that talks to you like you're fragile but stupid at the same time. She makes Victor buy almond milk for God's sake. She rearranged the kitchen the first time she stayed here, then called it decluttering. She holds his arm at dinner and calls him babe, like she invented the word. I see it. She's taking him. And unlike me, she'll never be asked to kneel on rice for burning soup. She won't suffer to keep him. And something about that makes my spine go cold. Dinner started off fine. I made a point to tell stories about Victor as a child, how he once ate a crayon, how he cried when I left him at daycare. Lucci laughed, but it was that polite laugh, the kind you use when you're waiting for your Uber. She barely touched the food, picked at the roast like she was testing for evidence. I noticed Victor watching her, concerned. They whispered once during dessert. That's when I knew. She knew. Later that night, I did what I once swore I'd never do. I pressed my ear to a door like a gossiping maid, and I heard it. "Pepper," she said, "your mom's testing me again." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And in that moment, I felt something inside me twist. Not guilt, not fear, something older. I remembered standing in my own kitchen, listening to my mother-in-law tell guests how I couldn't even cook rice without instructions from the bag. That sting in Lucci's voice? I had felt it before, and now it was mine to inflict. So I slipped, down the stairs. Not a fall, really, a controlled descent. 3 steps, a soft thud, enough to make Victor panic and Lucci freeze. Perfect. Suddenly I wasn't the villain. I was the victim, and I wore it well. As Victor brought me tea and Lucci brought silence, I sat back, the bruises forming slowly but beautifully, and thought to myself, maybe I am that woman after all, and maybe she wasn't wrong. They say food brings people together. In my house, it separates the strong from the allergic. Cooking for Christmas has always been an art form to me, not a recipe-following exercise, but a carefully calibrated dance of taste, memory, and psychological warfare. This year, I started planning in October. Not because I needed the time, hell, I could cook a roast blindfolded, but because planning is part of the pleasure. Like writing a novel where you already know the ending, but the characters still think they have choices. I stood in my kitchen 3 days before Christmas, weighing black pepper like it was powdered truth. Not too much, just enough to make her throat tighten ever so slightly, to make her reach for water while everyone else reached for seconds. I wasn't trying to kill her. I was trying to remind her that she walked into something older than her marriage license. This family has spice in its bones, and in this house, tradition has teeth. The roast was slow cooked with bay leaves, rosemary, and a discreet sprinkle of freshly cracked peppercorns, crushed by hand, not too coarse, not too fine. Just the way I used to make it when Victor was 10 and begged for thirds. The mashed potatoes, butter-rich and creamy, with a suspiciously warming note that she might blame on nutmeg, but no, that's pepper too. The salad dressing, homemade, apple cider vinegar, olive oil, a hint of Dijon, and a whisper of spice so faint it could pass as acidity. But the cranberry sauce was the masterpiece. That's where I added just a pinch more than usual, enough to linger. As I stirred, I caught my own reflection in the pot lid, eyes sharp, mouth tight. I remembered the same look on my mother-in-law's face the night she threw a raw chicken at the wall because I salted it wrong. I had cried in the pantry. She had gone to bed smiling, and now I understood why. It's not about cruelty. It's about legacy. I wasn't punishing Lucci. I was continuing the ritual. And somewhere deep inside, I needed her to know that. Then the phone rang. Victor. I pressed the answer button and waited. We'll be there a little early, he said, breathless. Do you think Lucci can eat the mashed potatoes? Not, how are you, Mom? Not, do you need help with the roast? Just that. Her, again, my son, my boy, asking permission for his wife to eat food I made in my own home. I smiled through my teeth. Of course, I said, and as he hung up, I reached again for the pepper. One more touch, just enough. As I stirred, a sudden flick of my wrist sent the spoon clattering to the floor, and the edge of the counter bit into my knuckle. Blood welled, thin and red, like a secret too fresh to hide. I stared at it, waiting for the sting, but it didn't come. I rinsed, wiped, and went back to stirring. Because this wasn't about pain. This was about order. If Lucci noticed, she would squirm. If she didn't, she would swallow history. Either way, I would win. And isn't that what tradition is really about? Survival, with a smile. I've always said, the dinner table is the truest battlefield. People dress up, sit straight, chew politely, but it's the eyes that betray them. That Christmas night, I watched Lucci from across the table, the way a lion watches a gazelle pretend not to limp. She picked at the roast. 1 bite, 2 sips of wine, her napkin folded and refolded like it held the answer to world peace. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, not once. And when Victor complimented the potatoes, she glanced at him, just a flicker, but I caught it. Disbelief, suspicion, as if she were waiting for him to scratch his throat or cough. I almost laughed. She was on to me, and she didn't know how to prove it. I spoke in full sentences, dropped old family stories like landmines, and called her sweetheart, with the same voice I once used on stray cats who wouldn't leave my garden. She responded with thank you and, of course, a performance so polished I almost clapped. But she never touched the cranberry sauce, and that's when I knew. She knew. Later, as they disappeared into the guest room, I cleaned the dishes with military precision. The sponge scraped harder than it should have, but my hands were steady. I waited. No sound for 10 minutes. Then a whisper, muffled, 2 voices. I moved to the hallway, barefoot, soundless, and leaned just close enough to catch it. She did it again, Lucci's voice hissed, like steam off a boiling pot. I swear, Victor, the roast, the potatoes, it's pepper, I can feel it. My son said something soft, something I couldn't hear. Then she snapped again, lower this time, but clear. You said you'd talk to her. In that moment, I wasn't standing in a hallway. I was 24 again, holding a bowl of soup while my mother-in-law told my husband I was lazy, that I would ruin him. I stood there, outside the door, and for a second, just a second, I thought maybe I'd knock, apologize, say it was just tradition, not malice. But then I remembered the look on Lucci's face at dinner, that quiet superiority, like she already knew she'd won. So I turned, 3 steps down the hallway, and then I let myself fall. Not clumsy, not wild, controlled. A roll of the ankle, a twist of the hip, a practiced crash that echoed just enough. The sound of porcelain bones and just enough breathlessness to alarm. Victor ran first. Lucci followed, guilt blooming on her face like a slap. Perfect. Oh my God, Mom, are you okay? He asked, lifting me gently. I groaned, the kind that could mean pain or pride. I looked up at her, at Lucci, wide-eyed, wounded, as if to say, You see what your silence did? She bent down, flustered, touching my arm with fingers colder than apology. I smiled through the wince. War wasn't declared that night, but lines were drawn, and I had the first casualty to prove it. Pain is a performance, and I, if nothing else, am a seasoned actress. The morning after the fall, I stayed in bed, not because I couldn't move, I could, but because the image of me curled up at the foot of the stairs still hovered in Victor's eyes, and I wasn't about to waste that leverage. He brought me tea with too much sugar, fluffed pillows like a nervous nurse, and called me Mom in that tone he hadn't used since he was 12. I winced gently at the smallest movements. A sigh when I turned, a breath held when I reached. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep the guilt fresh. Lucci hovered at the door like a well-dressed ghost. She offered help in clipped syllables. Can I get you anything? But I didn't look at her. Instead, I answered to Victor, even when she was the one speaking. Tell her I'd like another blanket. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Let her understand where the lines are drawn. If you're still here, quietly listening, thank you. Feel free to like and subscribe if you wish. That day, I told stories, not about my pain now, but from the vault. How I once slipped on ice in front of Victor's school and walked home on a fractured ankle just so he wouldn't be embarrassed. How I cooked dinner with one hand for a week after burning the other. I laced every story with phrases like, but I never made a fuss, and you do what you have to when you're a mother. Victor nodded, eyes glassy. Lucci said nothing. Later, as they moved around the house, cooking, cleaning, whispering, I listened, not just to the words, but the silences, the pauses when I coughed, the tension in Lucci's voice when she said, She seems better. And Victor's reply, Let's give her time. That's when I knew the spell was holding. My fall wasn't just an accident, it was a reset, a return, and I intended to stretch it until it snapped. That evening, Lucci brought in soup, carrot and ginger, homemade, too warm to accuse. She placed it on the nightstand and said, I hope this helps. I waited until she left to touch the spoon. Then I dumped the whole thing in the sink and let the bowl clang, loud enough for Victor to hear. He came running. Did something happen? I blinked slowly, wiped a non-existent tear. Just too spicy, I whispered. He didn't question it. He didn't ask why. He just sat beside me, silent, hand on mine. And Lucci? She stood in the hallway, watching. That's all I needed. Some people test boundaries with words. I prefer action. Small invisible traps. Nothing sharp. Nothing that would make her bleed. Just the kind of pressure that softens a spine over time. Like warm water over wood. That week, I became a master of casual inconvenience. I dropped spoons on purpose. Let laundry sit wet just long enough for it to sour. I forgot where the towels were and asked her to find them, knowing full well she hated opening cabinets in someone else's home. Every time she hesitated, every time she flinched, I took mental notes. It wasn't about power. It was about confirmation, that she was still uncomfortable here, still an outsider. And as long as she was adjusting, I was winning. I asked her to bring me a glass of water, then frowned when she handed it to me with the wrong hand. Not your fault, I said, smiling. You weren't raised around elders. She blinked, just once, but I caught the twitch in her jaw. The next day, I praised her outfit at breakfast, called it brave, for someone her age. Victor didn't notice. He never does. But she did. Oh, she did. Every day was a lesson, a game, a test. Once I asked her to iron a shirt for Victor, my son, not hers, and watched how long she paused before saying yes. Another time, I set the table with one fork missing from her spot. She quietly fetched one from the drawer. I nearly applauded. At night, I lay in bed and remembered how my mother-in-law used to test me. She'd cook fish on days I said I couldn't stomach it. She once poured tea over my hands by accident and called it a lesson in focus. I thought she was a monster, but now, looking back, I realized she was just preparing me. Women like us, we're forged, not born. And the fire is always domestic. By the end of the week, Lucci was still standing, but barely. Her smiles were thinner, her voice tighter. And every time she looked at Victor, I saw it. The plea, the silent question. Do you see what she's doing? And Victor, he saw soup bowls, laundry baskets, schedules. He didn't see war, but I did, and I was winning. Silence used to be my weapon. Now it was hers. Lucci didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't report me to Victor or slam doors or roll eyes. No, she did something far more dangerous. She disconnected, bit by bit, inch by inch. She stopped asking if I needed anything. She left the room when I entered, claiming chores that didn't exist. Her footsteps became softer, shorter. She walked through my house like a guest in a museum, careful not to touch anything she might be blamed for. And for the first time, I felt it. The absence of fear, the refusal to react, and it shook me. Victor didn't notice, of course. He was the kind of man who thinks peace is the absence of shouting. But I knew better. I saw the tightness in Lucci's jaw when I complimented her cooking, the way she smiled when I told Victor he looked thin, the faint delay before she answered anything I said. These were not signs of surrender. They were signs of calculation, and I hated how familiar it felt. Once I asked her to pass the salt. She did, wordlessly, without eye contact, as if I didn't exist, as if my authority, my very presence, had become irrelevant. I remembered that feeling. I had given that same silence to my own mother-in-law the year before she died. I thought it was strength then. Now I saw it for what it was, a declaration of war in the language of ice. So I adjusted. I made myself smaller in front of Victor, limped more dramatically when he was near. I praised Lucci in ways she couldn't defend against. "You're really finding your rhythm here," I'd say. Or, "You've become quite the homemaker, haven't you?" Each word dipped in syrup edged with blade, and still she said nothing. One night, I found her sitting on the back porch alone, hands wrapped around a mug like she needed something warm to hold on to. I stepped outside, stood beside her, didn't speak. She didn't flinch, just sipped her tea and stared into the dark. That was when I knew I wasn't winning anymore. I wasn't losing either. We had entered a new phase, a cold mutual understanding. She wouldn't play my game, so I'd have to change the rules. It started with silence, not the usual kind, not the calculated hush of a woman who knows when to hold her tongue. This was sharper, strategic, like someone had stopped reacting because they were instead recording. One morning, I caught a glint in Lucci's eyes. Not fear, not submission, but something far worse. Clarity. That unnerved me, because clarity leads to action, and I was right. 2 days later, Victor came home from work early. He didn't kiss my cheek. He didn't ask what I'd cooked. He went straight to Lucci, whispered something, and they both disappeared into the guest room. The door closed, locked. I stood in the hallway, listening to that dull click, and felt something I hadn't in years, the sting of being excluded. That evening, at dinner, Victor was quiet, polite, but his eyes didn't rest on me the way they used to. They drifted, past me, through me. I asked if he liked the stew, and he nodded, then said, "It's not too spicy this time." Not a compliment, a line, a coded message. I looked at Lucci. She was buttering her bread. Calm, composed. She didn't even smile. That's when I knew. She'd told him. Somehow, in that careful voice of hers, she'd spun the truth just enough. Not so I'd be accused, but so I'd be observed. Later, I tried to recover ground. I brought up an old story. How I used to cook for Victor when he was sick. How I stayed up all night once because he had a fever and didn't want to be alone. I expected a smile, a softening, something, but he didn't even look at me. He reached for Lucci's hand instead, held it, and said, "You're like that now, huh?" to her. And I just sat there, blinking, swallowing. I had raised him to be loyal, but maybe I never taught him who to be loyal to. That night, I opened the kitchen drawer and found my pepper grinder, replaced. Not gone, just newer, sleek, branded, as if to say, "We're watching now." I sat at the table for a long time, just staring at that drawer, and then I laughed. Quiet, bitter. The girl had played me. No screaming, no confrontation. She'd taken notes, bided her time, and struck not with a knife, but with a file folder. I remembered a time when I'd tried to record my own mother-in-law. Cheap cassette tape hidden in a potted plant didn't last an hour. She caught me, burned it, laughed in my face and said, "You think they'll believe you over me?" I didn't, and maybe that's why I survived. But Lucci wasn't looking for pity. She wasn't fighting to be liked. She was repositioning herself. And suddenly, I wasn't sure I was the director anymore. The hardest truths don't arrive like thunder. They creep in, soft and still, like rot beneath wallpaper. That morning, I sat in my kitchen, the same one I'd ruled like a throne room for decades, and realized the silence wasn't quiet anymore. It was hollow. The kind that echoes back at you. There was no war that day. No remarks, no games. Just coffee that didn't taste right, and a shadow on the wall that looked too much like mine, but older. I turned my head and caught myself in the window glass. For a second, I didn't see me. I saw her, my mother-in-law. That pinched mouth, that exhausted pride, that bone-deep bitterness disguised as control. I had spent years cursing her name under my breath, swearing I'd never do what she did to me. And here I was, in her kitchen, holding her posture, breathing her poison like perfume. I wasn't continuing a legacy. I was reliving a curse. I remembered how she used to stand at that exact stove, stirring tea she wouldn't drink, waiting for someone to ask how she was, just so she could pretend she was fine. I remembered hating her for it. And now I understood, because no one asks anymore. Victor doesn't. Lucci wouldn't dare. And even if they did, I don't know what I'd say. I'm fine. Doesn't sound like armor when you know you're the villain in their story. That night, I stayed downstairs after everyone went to bed. I walked through the living room, touching things I hadn't dusted in years. The old lamp, the wedding photo from a decade ago. Victor was smiling. I looked tired even then. I whispered to the frame, not even knowing why, maybe to hear a voice respond. Maybe to hear my own voice say something that wasn't a command. I sat in the armchair by the fireplace and thought, maybe the worst thing that can happen isn't being wrong. Maybe it's being exactly what you once feared. A woman so shaped by pain that she passes it on like fine china, elegant but cracked. I thought I was protecting a tradition. What I was really doing was preserving a trauma. And here's the bitter part. I didn't feel sorry. I didn't cry. I just felt tired. The kind of tired that settles in your bones when you realize the fight wasn't with them. It was with the mirror, and I had lost. You'd think after all that, after losing the room, the loyalty, the mirror, I'd stop, fold, fade into a corner like some retired villain. But no, because women like me, we don't disappear. We evolve. The following week, I attended the Wednesday tea at the senior center. Nothing formal, no banners, no announcements. Just a circle of women in cardigans, too bright for winter, sipping mint tea and nodding like bishops in confession. And as they spoke, I listened, not for sympathy, but strategy. She says I can't give him candy anymore, one woman muttered. Apparently sugar affects his sleep schedule. My daughter-in-law calls it her house now, said another. Imagine. After all I did. I watched them. These women with polite smiles and razor wire behind their ribs. And I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Understood. To my left, a petite woman with pearl earrings was whispering into the ear of a younger one, early 40s, well-dressed, tense. Don't answer everything. Smile more. Let them fill the silence, she said, adjusting the young woman's scarf like a general checking armor. The younger one nodded. Quiet, absorbing. And in that moment I knew. It wasn't just me. This wasn't personal. This was generational. A system polished over time, handed down like china sets and sharp advice. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't complain. I shared, gently, the kind of stories that sound like musings but cut like glass. How Lucci had helped reorganize my kitchen. How Victor consults her before scheduling holidays. How they replaced my pepper grinder. The group hummed in agreement. One woman patted my hand. Passive domination, she said. Textbook. Another added, they're learning to outplay us. We must adjust. And someone whispered what I now consider doctrine. We no longer fight with fire. We fight with soft words and social proof. And in that moment, I didn't feel beaten. I felt recruited. We spent the next hour exchanging recipes and tactics. Low-salt insults, misremembered names, how to weaponize politeness until it erodes the confidence of even the most assertive bride. It wasn't evil. It was adaptive. We weren't plotting revenge. We were passing down tools, like silverware, like trauma, like tradition. When I returned home, I opened my journal, not the one for Victor, the one for me. I titled the next page, Inheritance, How to Train Without Screaming, and as I wrote, I smiled. Not from victory, from continuity. They think the war is over, but we never needed noise to win, just time, and daughters-in-law that believe silence means surrender. Thank you all for watching this video. Please comment and let me know what you think about this story. Please like and subscribe to watch more great content on my channel.